Okay. So, here we are with convergent evolution again, and I just wanted to give you an idea. You have similar growth form in distantly related plants. So, here we have cactus. Here we have an Indian succulent. I think it's, I forget what it is. And then we have a euphorb. They all look the same. Where do they live? Very dry environment, right? Also, that flower there, that flower stinks. It smells like rotting meat, like carrion. And it's actually pollinated by flies that come and lay their eggs, thinking they're actually laying their eggs in meat when they're actually laying it in a flower. And that's in India, but there's one in South America, there's one in Africa, same sort of thing. In other words, there's convergent evolution in that kind of pollination. And then down on the bottom, we have a bunch of nectar feeders. We've got an iwi in Hawaii. We've got hummingbirds in mainly South America, but some in North America. We've got sunbirds in Africa. And we've even got a hummingbird hawk moth that they actually kind of do the same thing, but instead of having a long bill, they have a long tongue, proboscis. Okay? This is all example of convergent evolution or analogy. Okay? Okay. It's kind of loud. So we already went over this. This is too loud. Come on. Okay. Is convergent evolution the result of common ancestry or evolution by natural selection? What do you think? Huh? Evolution by natural selection. So remember, all these plants along the top, they look like cactus. They're not. One is. The one from India is not a cactus. They don't exist over in India, nor in Africa. They look similar. Why? What kind of environment do they live in? Desert. So they evolved adaptations independently in each of those places, but there's only so many solutions, aren't there? So it's likely that the same sorts of adaptations are going to be evolved because there's only a certain number of solutions. You need water storage if you're living in a desert environment, unless you spend most of your life as seeds, and then only when there's wet conditions once every 20 years do you actually germinate and create new seeds. The same thing goes with these nectar feeders. They all occupy what's called the same niche. A niche is like an occupation and also a place kind of where you live. So, not a habitat where you live. So, all of these birds feed on nectar in plants, and they pollinate plants accidentally. So they all have bills that allow them to put their bills into a long corolla and get the nectar. so that the plant has long corolla so that only things with the right, that are good pollinators can actually get access to it. So on the left, that's a Hawaiian honey creeper. It's called an aiiwi. There's a lot of honey creepers in Hawaii. In the Western Hemisphere, they're hummingbirds. We have, about 14 total in North America, but in South America, in the Caribbean, there's about 330 total. They all make a living the same sort of way, right? They have different kind of beaks for the different kind of flowers that they pollinate. In some cases, you have the male and the female have different bill sizes because they actually get nectar from different flowers. In fact, there's something called a carob hummingbird, and there's this plant, and the plant actually makes flowers for females and males. Okay, it's called coevolution. African sunbird, similar. Feeds on nectar, pollinates. And then a moth that's not a hummingbird or a bird, it's an insect, but it occupies the same sort of niche. The only difference is the birds all have good visual systems, and so the flowers that they usually get food from are brightly colored. Moths come out mainly at night, so a lot of the flowers that they pollinate are light pink or white. They tend to have a very sweet fragrance so that they can find the flower. Okay? Okay. We're going to be talking now about what's called macroevolution. Large-scale evolutionary changes in terms of above the species level, and those changes are caused by extinction, origination of new taxa. When you live in a place, let's say we had more people in this room and each chair was a different niche. Now there's a lot of empty niches here, but let's say it was all full. And someone, at the beginning of class, wanted to get into this class. That person can't get in because all the chairs are occupied. In other words, if you've got a chair, you're ahead of the game and you're not going to give it up. Okay? The same thing happens in a lot of places. There's lots of niches, but if things have been, there haven't been too many extinctions lately. There's lots of niches and they're all filled with organisms that are already really good at making a living there. So if a new species comes into the area, it's likely that it won't be able to, unless it can carve out its own little niche, it's unlikely that it's going to find a place to live. To do it, it means that it has to be better adapted to something in that environment compared to the organism that it's competing with. And that's called competitive displacement. Now, evolutionary potential of new taxa is usually realized when there's lots of empty niches. And that doesn't happen very often. When it does, though, often what happens is we get something called an adaptive radiation. That means you start with, let's say, one species. There are potentially all these empty niches as more and more organisms colonize the area. And species start to differentiate into new species? Well, when you start with one or a few taxa and they increase into, let's say, hundreds of different taxa, that's called an adaptive radiation. Now, there's three reasons, basically, for how this might happen. Of course, after a mass extinction, you have a big mass extinction, most everything is dead, there are a few survivors. Probably take a while before things kind of recover a little bit, but once they do, the space is wide open. Everybody else has died. And organisms can specialize in different niches, and so as they specialize, they become new species. Another is they come into an area, they colonize an area that's new and there are no competitors there. For example, like during dispersal, the Hawaiian Islands were colonized by a bunch of different animals and plants. They came from the mainland. Most of those things that came from different mainlands, of course, they just ended up in the middle of the Pacific. But some of them made it there. Hawaiian Islands are a chain that each island had come up at a different time, and that created allopatric speciation for a whole bunch of different organisms. So when a new island comes up, it's mainly lava, and then over time it gets colonized by plants and animals and all that. And then finally there's something called phenotypic innovation. In other words, an example is like feathers for flight. Before there were flight feathers, there were feathered dinosaurs, but they couldn't fly. But the feathered dinosaurs that evolved into birds could fly, at least a little bit, and they had sky's the limit. Now, in addition to the origination and evolution of new taxa, groups of organisms, when I told you that it's speciation is kind of like sexual reproduction and descendants, where you're all descended from great-grandparents, grandparents, parents, right? Speciation is the same sort of thing. Of course, we don't all live forever, and so people also die. And the same thing happens with species. So extinction is akin to death for a taxa instead of for an individual. So this is a branch of dinosaurs. They didn't make it past this point. Remember, this is time, okay? Some different fish taxa, including sharks and rays and bony fish. There was a split here. These are all tetrapods. Some eventually led to humans and mammals. Some led to crocodiles. Some led to birds. Here's some more dinosaurs. They didn't make it through an extinction, so there's no dinosaurs left except for birds, and then an amphibian. So each of those that aren't up at the top, that means they died. They've gone extinct. So there have been, since the Paleozoic, since about 500 and something million years ago, there have been 5 mass extinctions. Now before that time, perhaps 800 million years ago, were the first multicellular organisms. There were extinctions then too, but in terms of multicellular organisms, there are 5 mass extinctions. They kind of define geological time. So that's 500 million years, let's say. That's a long time, something that we can't even begin to imagine. A mass extinction not only includes species going extinct, but whole groups of species. The biggest mass extinction I got it cut off. Anyway, it's right here. It's the end Permian mass extinction. 250 million years ago. Looks like it might have been because of volcanic activity. It happened over millions of years. It didn't all happen at once. In fact, it looks like there are a couple of different pulses of extinctions. 90% of all species were lost. In other words, it's like only 1 out of every 10 of you would be left over. Mass extinctions, you often think, well, species that survive mass extinctions are perhaps better. They have traits. But generally, no, it's luck of the draw. So for example, this is what's called a trilobite. Trilobites were a major arthropod tax. Arthropods include crabs and insects and a bunch of different things. They also include trilobites. There were probably, I don't know, thousands and thousands of different species swimming in the seas. From the Cambrian, about 500 million years ago, all the way up until the Permian, 250 million years ago. They were incredibly successful, but they went extinct. But they survived a total of 270 million years. They were trilobites. Mammals, well, modern mammals, since the extinction that wiped out the dinosaurs, they're all maybe 55 million years old, the different groups like rodents and primates and all that. So it wasn't that trilobites weren't as good as what came after. Unfortunately, the oceans became incredibly hypoxic, very little oxygen, very acidic, and a lot of the extinctions happened in marine organisms. So, do mass extinctions have a major impact on the forms of biodiversity? In other words, the number and abundance of different groups of organisms that exist later, or are they just temporary reductions in biodiversity? Well, they reshape the total biota. Just by luck of the draw, some taxa manage to survive, and they are the beginnings of the next round of speciation and biodiversity. Okay. Has anybody heard about the asteroid that might have killed the dinosaurs? Anybody? Okay. So, there's a guy named Walter Alvarez and his son. He was at Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley. And he noticed, he was a geologist, and he noticed in strata that was about 66 million years ago that there was a thin layer of iridium, which is a molecule that is very rare on Earth. But it oftentimes makes up a major part of comets and asteroids. And this thin layer, it was found all around the Earth in the same strata. All 66 million years ago, you can actually date the rocks using radioisotopes. And this is, at this layer, below it, older, you see all these different dinosaur taxa that were there. And then above it, there's no more dinosaurs. Okay? There's birds, there's some mammals, there's some other reptiles, but the dinosaurs are kaput. And he hypothesized that an asteroid hit the Earth and caused the extinction. Now, if this is true, one of the predictions you can make is there should be the remains of a large crater somewhere on the planet. Now, of course, when he came up with this hypothesis with his son, you know, most people just poo-pooed the idea, but there was something there, but until they actually found a smoking gun, so to speak, all bets were off. And then about 10 years after he proposed this hypothesis, I remember when it happened. They found this humongous crater that was an impact crater that was about 110 miles across. The asteroid was probably 10 square miles, about something like 10 square miles. So it was a huge chunk of rock coming in at 50,000 miles an hour. And it created this huge impact crater right on the Yucatan Peninsula. Anybody ever go to Merida and the Yucatan? Nice area. But anyway, that's where that impact crater is. Parts of it are on the land, parts of it are in the ocean. It ejected a tremendous amount of material into the atmosphere. It also caused a tsunami, and not like the little tsunamis that we've had that were perhaps at the biggest 30 or 40 feet tall waves. These were thousands of feet tall, and this tsunami swept all the way in from the impact crater all the way in around this area of the southeastern United States. And they found all these deposits that coincided with that time period. They found these things called shocked quartz that you find in impact craters from melt, and a bunch of other things. And so here's the crater. Now, you could say, well, perhaps it's just a coincidence, okay, that this caused the mass extinction. Not of just the dinosaurs, but a lot of things. And it looks like it happened very relatively quickly. So this asteroid that did this, the reason they think that, well, there's mechanisms for why it would have caused the extinction, of course. First of all, there would have been something like a nuclear winter, where there was all this stuff in the atmosphere. Plants wouldn't have been able to photosynthesize. Major producers wouldn't have been able to create food. The whole ecosystem collapsed. All these things that relied on plants and in the oceans, algae and stuff, all died. And then as things unraveled, more and more species went extinct. Now, we can't really, it would be nice if we could take the Earth, replicate it 1,000 times, put it back to just before the asteroid hit, and then hit each of those Earths with an asteroid and see what happened afterwards. And we might get an idea of exactly, for sure, what happened. We can't do those kinds of experiments. But we can certainly, one of the predictions that we can make is that even though it was a correlation, it was a very, very tight correlation about the extinction event and the asteroid impact. So, mass extinctions, like I said, they completely reshape what's called the biota, the living planet. They kind of clear the decks. So for a while there's very little biodiversity, it starts to recover, but at that point the surviving taxa have very little competition left over. There's all these remarkable ecological opportunities that are not there normally when all the niches are filled up. Now, it's been said that when the dinosaurs went extinct, we entered the age of mammals. Because all of a sudden, mammals radiated right after that extinction event. So an adaptive radiation is where you start with one or a few taxa, and then they speciate and make many different taxa. So this is Australia, and this is the Americas. That Tasmanian wolf and the modern wolf, gray wolf, do you think they're related to each other? Why would you say that?
I don't know, because since you say that all creatures come from a certain
Ancestor, right. The thing is, Australia and the Americas, North and South America, have been separated for way before, since the first mammals showed up. Okay, so there were mammals already there, and then the ones in Australia were off by themselves, and the ones in North America were off by themselves.
Is it kind of like the example of the lizards when they're separated, they turn into two different, it's almost like different species?
Say that again.
Like the example of when you did the lizards, when the spotted lizards and then they...
Oh, okay, yes. And this is also called convergent evolution, right? So it's not ancestry, it's actually similar selective environments. Okay? Now, the reason that a Tasmanian wolf kind of looks and acts like a modern gray wolf is that it filled the same niche. It was a major carnivore. Furthermore, a Tasmanian wolf is actually a marsupial. It's got a pouch. Placental mammals don't. So all those different taxa, koala, numbat, western quoll, leadbeater's possum, bilby, those are all marsupials. But they correspond to a whole bunch of placental mammals because they're filling the same niche. This is an example of, so there were, in a sense, different locations that were separated after this mass extinction. There were major rapid adaptive radiations in Australia, in northern hemisphere, in southern hemisphere, in Africa, and all these new species originated from the common ancestors that were there and started filling all those kinds of niches, because there are only so many solutions. You know, there's in terms of being like a predator, usually there aren't very many predators and there aren't very many species of predators. There's a lot more species that they prey on. Okay, so here we are with the Hawaiian Islands and ecological opportunity. Now, the Hawaiian Islands are over 1,000 miles from the nearest mainland. They're in the Eastern Pacific. How long does it take to fly from here to Hawaii? A couple of hours. So 500, yeah, it's about 1,000, maybe over 1,000 miles, okay, away from the mainland. The Hawaiian Islands originated because there's a hot spot where molten magma erupts and creates new islands. As the plates that are, all the continents are on, start moving across this hot spot. And so you have a series of islands from oldest to youngest. Let's see here. So Kauai is the oldest of the group. Actually, if you go further east, west, it's the midway. Oahu showed up after that. The Maui complex, including Molokai and Lanai, arose after that. And then the newest island, of course, is the Big Island. And there's a new island that's now being formed as well. So, all these different things colonized the Hawaiian Islands. These honey creepers that are nectar feeders, these crickets, fruit flies, I think these are mayflies, and then these silver sword plants. They all underwent adaptive radiations because it was like they hit the sweepstakes. For the most part, everybody loses. They end up in the middle of the Pacific, but they all managed to land on one of these islands. As each new island popped up, there was dispersal. It got a long time for it to happen, and allopactic speciation. And so you had a radiation of all these different taxa, because as these islands developed in terms of the living things on them, more and more niches were available. So you can get an adaptive radiation from this as well. And then finally, you can get adaptive radiation from the evolution of, we'll say, key innovations. A good example, before there were fish with jaws, there were jawless fish. The first jawed fish had an incredible, yes?
I just have a question. So, what came first, chicken or egg?
From a common ancestor, right? So let's say you have a bird. It shared a common ancestor with a dinosaur. Those dinosaurs laid eggs. Those dinosaurs shared a common ancestor with crocodiles. They all laid eggs. Those crocodiles and dinosaurs and birds shared a common ancestor with other reptiles. Now, some reptiles have independently evolved live birth to one degree or another, but the ancestral thing is always the egg. So it's not like there's a chicken and an egg. It evolved from a common ancestor that used eggs to reproduce. So you don't need, first the egg or the chicken to lay the egg. You've got a common ancestor that laid eggs. Okay? How's that? Okay, now, another key innovation, of course, is feathers. There are dinosaurs with feathers. First of all, some of them have what amount to downy feathers. So, and they came from scales. So it looks like probably, why would you have downy feathers? Anybody? What benefit? Huh? What do you usually wear down for? Is it hot out or cold out? Cold, okay. Insulation. What else are feathers for? Well, for display. Remember the mannequin? Well, these dinosaurs right here, they actually know they look like this. Not only do they have the bones, but they have the feathers, and they actually have pigment, the remnants of pigment in those feathers. So they're fossilized. And they know that pigment was kind of dark brown and then very light colored. So there was, probably looked something like that. Or this bird-like dinosaur or bird down here probably looked like that because of the pigment in the feathers. Now, the difference between birds and all these feathered dinosaurs is they actually have flight feathers. In other words, feathers, in a sense, are a vestigial trait that were then co-opted and used for something new. And flight feathers are very different than these other kinds of feathers. They're asymmetrical. So they're designed to help with lift and thrust. And you can imagine being able to fly opened up all these niches that were not available before. And so, after the mass extinction, there was one lineage or two lineages of birds left over that survived. One of them was centered in South America, and they gave rise to all the other birds that are now here, and there are about 10,000 species now. And it's only because of flight that happened. There was actually a radiation before the dinosaurs went extinct too, but many of those groups of birds actually died out.
Appeared as dinosaurs evolved from their earliest ancestors.
It is by using the sequence in which those characteristics appear that we reconstruct.
Appeared as dinosaurs evolved from their earliest ancestors.
It is by using the sequence in which those characteristics appear that we reconstruct the history of life.
Gautier found that dinosaurs and crocodiles parted ways 240 million years ago, when the ancestors of dinosaurs evolved the ability to stand up and run with their legs straight under their bodies. As the family branched out, the meat-eaters called theropods became more and more bird-like, acquiring traits like a three-toed foot, a three-fingered hand, a wishbone, and many others. Each new feature was passed along to the descendants. Finally, a branch led in one direction to Deinonychus, and in the other to Archaeopteryx and birds. With birds nested at the top of the dinosaur tree, linked to their ancestors by hundreds of inherited traits, Gautier says there can be no doubt about the family ties.
Birds are dinosaurs. That's why they look like dinosaurs.
And some dinosaurs look like birds. We now know there's one detail the makers of Jurassic Park got wrong. The raptors should have had feathers. The fossils from China proved it.
So, it was about, I guess 20 years ago, about that, when the first fossilized feathers were found on dinosaurs. There are all these other traits that birds and dinosaurs share in terms of, three-toed foot and all that. But suddenly there were feathers. So feathers are a homologous trait between dinosaurs and birds. Okay. So, we live in a place, in a planet with tremendous amounts of biodiversity. All this biodiversity happened since various mass extinctions. In terms of which taxa survived to create new taxa and which didn't, a lot of this is pretty much the luck of the draw. There's some indication right now that we're encountering another mass extinction caused by humans. Now, we're losing species at an alarming rate. Not that life is going to disappear on the planet. Humans might disappear. Most taxa might disappear like any mass extinction. But eventually, life will originate and evolve new taxa. So just because we think we're the greatest doesn't mean we're going to actually stick around. Okay. Human evolution. Now, anybody in here have an inner eight? Anyway, that's not nice to chimpanzees. It turns out that we share a common ancestor with chimpanzees and bonobos. They're our closest living relative. Our DNA is about a 2% difference between our DNA and their DNA in terms of base pair substitutions, alleles. Comparing us to, let's say, mice, we share about, something like 70% of the same genes. Now, modern humans didn't just show up fully formed. They evolved like anything else evolved from a common ancestor. Remember I showed you that apes have 24 homologous chromosomes and humans have 23. What happened to that extra chromosome? Well, they were fused together. Now, when that happened, no one knows, but certainly the lineage that led to modern humans included that event. So, the lineage that led to modern humans and chimpanzees probably split about 7 million years ago. One of the big questions was, which came first? Walking upright or a larger brain? If it was a larger brain, would you expect to see the larger brain showing up in older taxa or newer? Newer or older? older. It turns out that bipedalism, so here's, yeah, I knew that was going to be, okay, worthless. Okay, there's time. Bipedalism shows up in the fossil record first, and it's not until much later that we start seeing an increase in brain size here. And before there was Homo, the genus Homo, of which we are Homo sapiens, there were these Australopithecines, like Lucy was the most famous one. Some of them were fairly large. They were bipedal, but they had a small brain, like about the size of a chimpanzee, maybe a little bit bigger. Skin color is an example of conversion evolution. Not all light-skinned people are descended from the same light-skinned ancestors, and darker skin the same way. Skin color has a lot to do with the environment. In northern or southern latitudes, the light is less intense. There's lower UV. One thing humans need is vitamin D, and it's one of the few vitamins that humans can actually synthesize. You need light to do it. Okay, so in low light conditions, like let's say up in the Arctic, you have light skin, you're likely to have adequate vitamin D. If you were dark skinned up there, you would probably be low vitamin D. Now, folate is another vitamin. Let's see, too much UV inhibits folate. And so, in light conditions, low UV, you have adequate folate. Now, under high conditions, you have adequate vitamin D, of course, if you're light, adequate vitamin D if you're dark. But if you're light, you have low folate. If you're dark, you have adequate folate. And so, again, you're favored to have darker skin. Evolution of skin color has evolved many different times in terms of different kinds of skin color. Most of our African ancestors had darker skin. As human populations moved into Eurasia, into the higher latitudes, there was strong selection for lighter skin. In fact, even Neanderthals have had relatively light skin and red hair because they were mainly found up in Eurasia. And so modern humans that have light skin are not descended from Neanderthals with light skin. And then if you look at like Australians, Aborigines, they have very dark skin, much like Africans, but they also, a lot of them actually have blonde hair. That was another different mutation. Again, okay. Now, do you think having a big brain is expensive?
Yeah.
Why? What's the expense? Well, what's the expense that we need so that we can actually survive and get energy? We have food, right? Okay. Well, it turns out our brains are really big, and they use about 20% of all the food that we eat. in terms of energy production. Now, grains are, I think, about 5 pounds or something like that out of 100 and something. So a small percentage of the overall body weight, but a tremendous amount of the resources that go towards large grains. In other words, they're really expensive. Perhaps right now you might even say that perhaps there's selection on having smaller grains. That, you know, there seems to be a lot of people out there that really aren't using their brains anyway. And so they can still breed adequately, you know, and perhaps over time we'll just end up being kind of like troglodytes, all of us. So there's several lines of evidence that there's a hypothesis that perhaps natural selection for the ability to reason and communicate led to increased tool use and language. And this reasoning ability required a bigger brain. However, it sounds plausible, but it could just as easily be perhaps using tools and language favored larger cognitive capacity. So this is one of those things in terms of cause and effect that we kind of dealt with before. Now, there's a lot of hypotheses in terms of why intelligence actually evolved. One is the cognitive map hypothesis. So these birds down in the left-hand corner, they're pinion jays. They take seeds and they bury them all over the place. They perhaps make 5,000 or 10,000 caches of seeds over the course of when the seeds are available so they can have something to eat during the winter. They remember where those seeds are. In other words, they have an incredible mental map. It makes us, puts us to shame. But you can obviously see how having a good map for hunter-gatherers is probably beneficial. So perhaps one of the reasons, or one of the things that evolved from having a big brain was that. Another is that, anybody in here, did you usually pick someone that you are attracted to because of the way they look or because of how smart they are? I always go for looks. But I come from that generation, you know, what are you going to do? There's Einstein right there, except he's on a buff body. You know, I mean, God, he would have been really dangerous. So it's possible perhaps that obviously some people pick mates because of intelligence or something like that. Yes?
Didn't Einstein have a lot of sex?
Yes, he did. Perhaps because they thought he was sexy, you know? This guy was amazing. Let's have sex with him. The hell with rock stars, right? And then, right now, in this place, probably the strongest selective force is the social environment. What do you have to know, or what do you think is important to know about who's around you? Can you give me one idea? What? Okay, so there's all these people. Some are friends of yours, some are not. Okay. Why is it important to know that? So who are you going to rely on if something bad happens? your friends, right? You have friends and you know they're somewhat reliable. Unless something bad happens and they always turn tail and run, but then you find out something about it. There's other people in here that you don't know about, and some of them look pretty sketchy. So it's important to be able to read the people around you. It turns out human beings aren't all that good at it. And that's why we have sociopaths who take advantage of that. They come on really nice, and then they rape and pillage. And then they go on to the next victim. So the social environment is really important. You have to know who your friends are. You have to look and see who are potential mates. Right? You might say, God, oh, is he cute? Oh, I'll never get him. You know, social status or whatever. All that kind of stuff. So all these things about understanding who you're surrounded with requires a fair amount of brain power. It's called theory of mind. That's an ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. You can see how that might be beneficial. You say, okay, you look at someone, and you think, I don't know if I trust that guy. I wonder what he's going to do. And then you decide, the hell with it, and you kill him. Because you think maybe, well, you're putting yourself in his shoes, and you're thinking he's a bad dude, right? So you take a preemptive strike. Being able to do that is called theory of mind. Also, one of the ways, well, some animals, when they see themselves in a mirror, they know it's themselves. Whereas other animals, like cats, they see a cat in a mirror and it's another cat. Okay? So primates can do this, elephants can do it, some primates, not all. Perhaps dogs, not cats. So this whole idea of intelligence, also, it doesn't, you would think that, having great intelligence is wonderful. It's actually very expensive. And there's been instances where you have strong selection for less intelligence, where you don't get any benefit, more benefit for being intelligent. You're just wasting a lot of energy. Okay. So, on the right is modern humans, Cro-Magnon man, anatomically modern, from Europe, fairly tall. On the left is Neanderthals, maybe 5'2", 5'5", but they went 280. Okay, I mean they had incredibly big bones compared to modern humans. They hunted big game. I mean, modern humans did too, but they did more of it. And they had a bunch of things like you often find Neanderthal bones with fractures that are healed fractures. And they had other things that protected them. One of them was a closed rib cage. As you can see, humans don't have that. What's interesting is that occasionally, like some humans are born with a little tail, sometimes you get a modern human, the genes aren't turned off, and so you end up with a closed rib cage. Not very often, but occasionally. Anyway, these were contemporaneous. They lived at the same. This is some DNA data. Human, that's different populations of humans. There's a fairly wide range of differences in alleles in mitochondrial DNA. But if you compare it to Neanderthal human, there's much more. So in other words, the more closely related you are to, let's say, other individuals and other populations, the fewer differences there are. The further apart you are, the more distantly related. And then there's these Denisovans that are DNA that was recovered from a cave in Siberia, and they show about 385 differences in terms of the mitochondrial DNA. The nuclear DNA shows the same sorts of things. It actually, normally you can't recover fossil DNA, but it's been done recently over the last 10 years. Started by a guy named Svante Pabo, who started with Egyptian mummies. So we've been recovering a whole bunch of ancient DNA. So it looks like modern humans and Neanderthals overlapped in Europe from about 40,000 years ago. Modern humans and Denisovans, some human populations also overlapped, I think more recently. We still don't know, only a few bones of Denisovans have ever been recovered, so we don't really know much about what they look like, but we know that they're separated from Neanderthals. Humans and Neanderthals and Denisovans, they had a most recent common ancestor, probably about 1 million years ago. So there's been hypotheses about where did modern humans originate. One of them was that modern humans spread out and they were widely spread across Africa, Asia, Australia. There was a lot of gene flow going on, and eventually modern humans evolved from all that random mating going on. Another hypothesis was that modern humans originated from a population in Africa. And then there were some people who thought that perhaps Neanderthals and Denisovans interbred with humans. So if we set up these as hypotheses in terms of predictions, one of them is that we should find the oldest, if it's multi-regional, the oldest fossil should be spread all over the place, whereas the other two hypotheses, the oldest fossil should be found in Africa. Genetic diversity should be greatest, or should be equal in all the different regions, whereas the longer a population is in one place, the more genetic diversity they accumulate from mutations. So if it's out of Africa, you should probably find the greatest diversity of alleles in human populations in Africa. In fact, some populations in Africa are, they're as different as like Chinese is from British or something like that. When a population goes from one place to another, it often causes what's called a founder effect. You guys probably remember that. Well, a founder effect, you've got a small population. It's also a subset of the genetic diversity from which it came. And so, if it's out of Africa, or admixture, these ancestral alleles should be much more common in a place of origin compared to elsewhere. And if the place of origin was all over, then they should be equal. And then in terms of gene flow, it makes the prediction that multi-regional, there's lots of gene flow. Out of Africa, modern humans evolved from there, left Africa, replaced all the archaic humans like Neanderthals. Or the admixture, there was some limited interbreeding. So, this is, the oldest fossils were found in, around Ethiopia, 200,000-year-old fossils. Modern humans were also found in South Africa, about 150,000-year-old fossils. There's some in the Middle East, about 100,000. Europe, 40,000 modern human years, and then Neanderthals were also there. And then the Denisovans were found in populations of modern humans that migrated down into Australia. So here's the fossil evidence, right? The oldest fossils were found in Africa. The most recent fossils that left Africa were about maybe over 100,000 years ago in the Middle East. And then Australia was colonized probably 50 or 60,000 years ago. Europe, 40,000. So all these fossils are found, the oldest ones in Africa and subsequently after. Genetic diversity, the same sort of thing. You can see most of the genetic diversity. Africa has the highest amount. As you get farther and farther away, you start losing genetic diversity because of these founding populations. Now, it turns out a lot of you in here have Neanderthals in your ancestry. Eurasians have about 2%. So they interbred. Once humans left Asia, they probably ran into Neanderthals in the Middle East, and there was some interbreeding. Oh, it probably wasn't like, you know, bringing your girlfriend flowers. It was probably like bashing her over the head and dragging her into a cave between humans and Neanderthals. And there's also evidence in populations in Australia that they also bred with Denisovans. Now, the interesting thing is, what's the species concept in terms of where you're able to interbreed within your own population, but you can't make fertile offspring outside? What species concept is that? You guys remember? Biological species concept? Okay. So, you might say, well, perhaps Neanderthals and humans are just the same species. They're producing offspring. But it turns out there's evidence that there was hybrid male infertility. Because they've looked at the genome on the X chromosome that handles a lot of reproductive traits. And they found almost no, in humans, they found almost no Neanderthal DNA there, indicating that it was selected against. So you might find DNA all over the human genome, but there, it's not there at all. So it looks like, actually, that if humans and Neanderthals produced offspring, they were probably sterile. They might produce female offspring, male probably just, maybe didn't even, they were stillborn, who knows. So, And in terms of these hypotheses, it looks there's more and more evidence that humans interbred with Neanderthals, and we have a bunch of genes. If you look at all modern humans and you look at how much Neanderthal they have, it's probably a total of 20%, even though each individual only has a few percent. And they were also found Neanderthals with modern human DNA in terms of the DNA recovered from them as well. Okay. And then there's all these questions you can go through at the end. Remember to bring 8A2E Scantron. There's going to be 50 questions. And then there's going to be 17 extra credit questions from which you can get 6 extra credit questions applied to your score. So when you do the extra credit, you want to do all of them to make sure that you have a higher chance of actually getting 6 correct. Okay? So there'll be 100 points, and then there'll be an extra 12 points possible.
This